Because
That's enough for training. Grab the game on. These meeting rooms are great if you can nuke these two poles.
Yeah, it's oh, it's coming through now. I'm getting audio.
basically, I need headphones to plug into my computer to keep it from doing the feedback. But yeah, I think it should be good now.
I mean, it's pretty quiet.
Is that better?
I do not. Got
Left them at home.
like a where they cleared out. Yeah, this is renovated forward. I don't think we need to. We'll just not renovated. They do not.
I'm getting the audio now.
Sweet.
Sweet.
That'll work. So this is Daniel Waddell.
I also have wasted some time on your Scramboardle.
Hey, Daniel, thank you. I used to work with Daniel. Now he, works for MedLife.
Okay.
He's our principal architect for cloud stuff.
Principally.
Yeah, he tolerated my.
It wasn't principal as in the first, it's principal as in principled. I was just very opinionated.
Well, that's true. That hasn't changed, I'm sure.
Been drinking bourbon.
What's the question?
Where's the ice?
It's just Coke Zero.
Sitting there sipping on bourbon. This is why he connected.
This is just Coke Zero. I might be self-medicating by the end of this call, but right now it's just Coke Zero.
Yeah, it's just a, yeah, note about the content. Aren't you presenting soon?
Who's that?
You.
I don't have anything scheduled. I think Schlegel's got the next call or next
Give me the stupid write-up.
allegedly. Is he there in the room with you? Where's he at?
I think he went down.
Schlegel?
He had a couple more people in, I think, right?
Nice.
There was about 5 or 6 in the list, including me.
All right, I'm gonna step away for a few minutes.
No takers yet?
The room needs,
Yeah, just hits it.
the room needs 2 cameras right there.
Is what?
The room needs 2 cameras right there facing this way. Aiming at, like, real narrow, aiming at the screen for the presenters. So you literally can stand here. There's fancy software occlude me from those screens and use these.
Yeah. Yeah,
Certainly something that can be done.
they got all these 4 super fancy cameras there, but like, why would you stand facing?
I gotta stand, I gotta facing the screen, have my back to the crowd. I'm gonna right here with those cameras that maybe that works.
Mike, you run Dynatrace, but what's the other observability tool? Splunk. Sorry, I couldn't.
I don't know, I don't care.
I know you don't care. Well, it's just so forgettable. It makes sense. No.
It's actually the much more expensive one, so. Yeah.
Were you here last time?
No, this is my first time. Terry.
Let's meet you.
Nice to meet you.
There's been, what, 2 of them now, I think?
Yeah, 3, and then we had that a couple months off, yeah.
Did one on Kubernetes inside of Kubernetes inside of Kubernetes. Because you can't abstract Kubernetes enough. There's always another layer of Kubernetes.
Put a container on it.
You can you can virtualize Kubernetes inside of Kubernetes.
What's that movie where they're like, they go back down in time, and then they go down.
Was it Inception, I think? Was that the, yeah.
Dream within a dream.
Yeah, Kubernetes Inception.
The Rick and Morty episode where they did that was really good.
Oh my gosh, that was bonkers.
Think I 2 seasons behind.
Wait.
There was something more higher than this.
Oh, you can like here or up here.
But it is also 80 degrees outside. So,
Technically, we should be outside doing this like a Taco Maxo or whatever it is next
Yeah,
door,
right.
right? Just have it right outside. Anthony can do what he's gotta do. So camera seems to like you.
well, I told you it's my restless leg syndrome. I can't stay still, so it's just gonna keep pointing at me. To channel my inner Drax, I'm not moving.
That's what it is.
Mr. Waddell, I'm not sure if you saw that Daniel Boone Backcountry Byway did release dates for the spring.
Oh, really?
Byway event.
Okay.
I can't remember when it is,
Are
but
they
I
gonna
just saw that.
do they do the whole thing? Is that a?
They do the whole thing on Saturday. This year, they're offering something else where they're calling it the overlanding experience or whatever. And so it's like you actually do 2 remote camps
Oh, yeah.
while you're on the trail. I don't know where they've
No.
organized that.
Have you done it before?
I've never done it.
Haven't either. And I've heard it's pretty mild, like, which is a good thing, not a bad thing.
We'll get done. Yeah.
But then they were like, they had actually called out the sections of like, here's where, if you've got a stock, whatever, you go here. If you're modified to this, you can go this route if you want to. So, but the overlanding thing was like, I don't know, $200 or something. I was like,
Yeah.
No, I just want to do like the day ride.
Right.
So I think,
Did you sign up?
I haven't signed up yet, but they've made it like,
We may have to get Mike involved here too, and so I'll go. He's got a Jeep.
oh,
That's what he drives.
so I think it's like the whole week now. And
Yeah, I mean,
every-
it's like the whole thing is like 200 miles, right? Like the
Yeah, and
whole
I
byway.
think it's 110 miles.
Yeah.
And you can do it in a day
Yeah,
easily, but like
easily, yeah.
I think the whole camp thing, like of course the main event's on Saturday, but I think it starts maybe on Tuesday now. And so you can kind of come and go.
Well, see, I have an off-roading camper too, like an RV that's meant for off-roading. But so it would have to be something
Yeah.
super mild,
Yeah, I would leave
but
that at the camp. Go to your next location and just meet it there or whatever.
What's up, Camden? How you doing, man?
I'm good, man.
Good to see you.
I missed the last one.
Doing good.
Heard it was the best.
The speaker,
You're like, you actually heard about this?
the guy who spoke, he's pretty good.
Who was the guy who spoke?
I did. That's
Oh,
He's pretty
great.
something. I picked the right one of these to skip. Camden's there.
Yeah, I
We've skipped
know.
quite a few. The last one was on Azure OpenAI.
I think it was gone. Traveling.
6:01, so we can give people a few more minutes, maybe. Terry was saying, Mike, that they announced the dates for the Kentucky back. What's it called again?
The Daniel Boone Backcountry Byway.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
The Back the Byway event, which is the.
it's like 100 miles of off-road.
Do you have to own a Jeep?
Well,
Yes. No, you bring whatever you got.
just anything four-wheel drive will do. That you can do it. You'll have to skip sections, but
They
You
had
don't-
sections
Oh,
of the Jeep.
there's a Jeep only section, is what you're saying? Are you saying
That's how I heard it.
my long Colorado is just not going to be able to pull it off?
you are more than welcome to try.
Oh,
I
I
think
just
that's
imagine
the
those-
spirit of it.
Imagine those signs at like a
Oh,
union
geez.
parking lot where they're like,
No.
more cars to the back. Like, yo, non-Jeeps? Y'all gotta go somewhere else.
Well, and then there's the Kentucky Toyota Land Cruiser group that shows up, and they got their own section, away from the Jeeps.
And then the Bronco people, they schedule a different meet on the same day. somewhere.
Yeah. And they have to bring their own mechanics too, so. On the trail.
A bunch of groups that don't like each other are centered around what car you bought.
You're like, I didn't even choose this car. Parents gave it to me.
This is a hand-me-down.
It's just a hand-me-down.
I wanted a Porsche.
Yeah. I don't even want to be in this group.
Can't do anything on that four-wheel drive side. Where we want to get going?
This is Anthony's rodeo. Daniel's rodeo.
Yeah, I mean, it's 6:03. We could go ahead and get started.
Thank you guys for letting me speak.
Thanks for speaking.
Struggling, right? You see Anthony's calling me every couple of days. He's like, you got that presentation done yet? I'm like, oh God, no, I don't have that done yet. But today I'm going to talk about website identity with Azure B2C. Well, really, I'll even take the website off of it. Identity with Azure B2C, because where identity's going in the Azure infrastructure it's actually pretty significant. And wanted to introduce you to where it is today and where it's going to go from there. So where do we come from? Where are we today? Where are we going? We're actually in a transition period because Azure can rename themselves Entra ID. And as a result, B2C is also changing with that.
As a result, it took me 3 days to find the button to get there because I had no idea they renamed it.
Right?
And I was lost.
So a little bit about me. My name is Derek Licciardi. I run my own company, Elysium Productions, and we are a Microsoft cloud service provider. We resell Office, resell Dynamics, resell Azure, and then service all of it, including programming, setting up infrastructure and whatnot. We were just talking earlier, and we got a client where we're setting up a virtual WAN for 'em using Azure Virtual WAN. And then we've got others who are doing Shopify integrations and whatnot. We've been a cloud solution provider since 2016. And this year we will become a direct partner with Microsoft on the levels of Ingram Micro and Tech Data and all those bigger companies. I'm significantly excited about that. Family, on the right, wife Bridget, Caitlin and Amanda, my 2 daughters. Big Boston sports fan, grew up in Boston, transplant to here though, and I graduated from U of L. Love to talk all about U of L, but God, this basketball season sucked. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Where do we start with identity? I don't know if anybody remembers these tables in SQL Server. You know, back in ASP.NET, this is the foundation of web forms. This is actually in one of its later iterations, because it didn't have anything to do with role claims or anything like that. But it all started with storing your information in SQL Server. It was what grew up from classic ASP and what people were doing there, which was all kinds of bad practices. And so Microsoft tried to standardize that. It was successful for a while, and then OAuth kind of came around and REST APIs came around, and the entire model struggled to keep up with just being able to manage identity. And then social media came around, and now they wanted to log in with Facebook accounts, and that's where ASP.NET Identity, even ASP.NET Core Identity, which still exists today, kind of fell down, and we moved away from it. So those are some of the problems. We really needed something new with it. One of the big problems with it is that the SQL Server and all of the data layer, there was no layering in the application. And so the SQL Server was directly connected to the front end website, and you couldn't really do anything as a service. When it came time to drop MFA in place, it fell down again. And time again, as apps on the web got more and more modern and identity access was more and more complex, it just wasn't something that was going to last. Does anybody remember it?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody remember using?
I wrapped it in a microservices, and we made it one database that was multi-tenant. So all the applications in the enterprise were driven by that. And then we stuck a identity server in front of it, which was so that we could get tokens, JWT tokens.
Yeah. So the tokens thing was just a huge problem. I
Yeah.
remember when they introduced MVC.
Mhm. That was about the time that we,
Yeah, it was right about the time that the authentication pipeline underneath ASP.NET and other websites was growing to the point where you could inject middleware in the interim solution.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of the solution. And I had an older app, actually that app's still running today on forms authentication, go figure, that we tried to move to MVC, and it just fell down. There was no way to do it. You couldn't get forms authentication to broker anything that had to do with OAuth and get tokens correctly. And yeah, you end up finding the bottom of like Google and Bing trying to figure it out. You actually have to go to Bing and try and figure it out because you ran out in Google. And so you go to the backup. And so what exactly is Azure B2C? Azure B2C is Microsoft realizing that they had Active Directory, which they brought into Azure to become Azure Active Directory. And in that process, Active Directory shed a lot of the object hierarchy of Active Directory itself. So Azure Active Directory it's really not Active Directory. It's so badly named. It's just the identity portion of Active Directory. Whereas all of the, like the Microsoft Exchange stuff that would get dumped into Active Directory on premise that for a long time didn't exist and still doesn't exist in Azure Active Directory proper, it exists in Microsoft Graph. And so as that evolved, Azure Active Directory was like, we got a good identity solution. So now how do we make a tenant within a tenant? And that's what gave birth to Azure B2C. And so with Azure B2C, it's essentially a subset of Azure AD. And it does almost everything Azure AD does. You'll find it very familiar when you log in, with everything from users and groups to app registrations, and the way you get tokens is all the same. And then they went ahead and said, oh, we got this. Well, how do we make it so that we can do this for external users? And B2C, business to consumer, is for external users. It's actually in the licensing for Azure B2C that you cannot use Azure B2C for employees. And so you have to use Azure AD for Humana's employees or MetLife's employees. But for MetLife's customers, you could absolutely run that customer database on Azure B2C and let it feed all of your websites and all of your apps, including mobile apps. And so they took a look at where they were with website identity, where they were going with the real small Azure ASP.NET Core identity, and said, well, how do we grow that up? How do we take advantage of the multi-factor authentication that we have in Azure AD and whatnot? And that's where we wound up here. Azure B2C uses the same APIs, all the same DLLs. So you'll find a DAL, which is now deprecated, but you'll find a DAL for it. Azure, the Active Directory authentication layer. And you'll find all the various flavors of that, from JavaScript to C# to whatnot. And now you'll find MSAL, which is Microsoft authentication layer. And you'll find that for all your different tech stacks. And all that does is wrap all the APIs that would otherwise access Graph and Azure B2C, so that you can drop this stuff in place in an MVC app or in a REST API or even in a React single page app, and get it all up and running where you have this identity store behind your website. It's consumption based. It's pretty cheap until you get to like massive scale. It's the only real expense, and I'll talk a little bit about it a little bit later on. The only real expense you get is when you enable SMS authentication, because you got to pay the SMS charges. And that's not B2C's fault. That's, you got to send that SMS over AT&T's network and they're charging Microsoft for it. And so you're going to pay that plus a little bit more to get that message to the user. If you use an authenticator, you don't incur those charges. And so coming in, creating a tenant, it's actually really simple, and God, we can't see some of it. But you need to look in a subscription, you're limited to 20 instances of Azure B2C. And that sounds like a lot, but when you've got multiple environments where you need multiple user databases, and you don't want to expose those user databases to your production customer database or vice versa, then you end up having at least 2 or 3 of these running for your apps. And a couple of the places where we've implemented this, we've had a dev instance, which was very limited in the users, but it was still there to be connected to. It's where we also developed all the identity experience, which is how you log in. And then we had a QA instance where we would be able to invite other people in to deal with the QA app. And then we had a production instance. You can go all out and have one per environment. We found that it was pretty easy to share the dev in all the different other environments that you use, like a hotfix environment or a training environment or whatnot. But you do have to think about it from a subscription level, because you can only have 20 of them. Let's see. Yeah.
So a B2C tenant lives in the subscription
Yes.
level? Okay.
Lives inside the subscription, but where it gets kind of crazy is when you go up to the top right corner in the Azure portal and you drop down your profile and you say switch directory, it's an actual directory you can switch to.
Hmm.
Okay.
And so when you switch to that directory, now you're in that directory. And so you have all the rights and privileges of you being in that directory. And so if you can't manage app registrations in that directory, but you can manage app registrations in Azure AD, well, okay, those are the two separate profiles. They're two separate permission sets.
Tell me you're gonna get to this. Does that, but do you sync that with your AAD or intra ID?
No. No, so this is meant to be, Azure B2C is meant to be standalone. It's where when your customer signs in, they're providing you their email address or their phone number, and they're getting access to an application that you're providing them.
Okay. No
Um,
reason to add you as a user of your own environment as a
You
B2C
get
customer.
added as a guest.
yeah, you would add as a guest,
Okay.
and that's absolutely
You
correct.
definitely want to do that because you don't want to have to manage your work account inside the B2C tenant.
Yes.
Makes sense.
And
Okay.
so your
It is.
employees would become a guest of this tenant. You give them elevated access to allow them to do the things in no, I keep saying Enter ID, but this is B2C, Azure B2C.
Is there a way to set up a trust so that you can, like, everybody automatically becomes a
Not
guest?
on,
Or is it
not
a?
on-
Not on Azure
everybody
B2C.
is-
Yeah, not on-
We'll talk about that with Enter ID and how the evolution of this is moving forward. As I get to the end of the presentation. And so setting up a tenant is choosing a domain name. You get an on Microsoft.com tenant, just like you get that tenant for your Office 365 tenant. And so you're gonna want to pick one you have to pick one that's globally available. And it's that simple. There's only like 5 fields to fill out. The rest of it is all done once the thing is set up. Takes about 20 minutes for it to set up because it's got to deploy globally. This tenant lives at the top of Microsoft. So out of all of their infrastructure, it's a tenant. And so it lives at the same level as your Azure AD tenant, even though it's billed through your Azure subscription.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you'll see why with all of this that I'm talking about, when we talk about Enter ID and Enter External ID, you'll see why they're taking it another step because yes, it's confusing and there's some clarity that needs to come out there.
Can I go into that tenant and create a subscription and then create B2C in that subscription?
no,
You cannot create a
Oh.
subscription that's anchored.
no.
You see, there's no virtualization of Kubernetes on Kubernetes. You can set a custom domain. That actually used to not be something you could do. And it is something in the last year that they enabled. And it's done through Azure Front Door. So you just stick in a front door on the front of it and brokering all the domain name rewrites back and forth so that you can have login.contosa.com. Because one of the things, when they didn't have it, one of the things we saw with an app we implemented, which I'll show you in a little bit, was that users noticed it. They'd come to, so the app we had was called carugo.com. It was the place to buy and sell cars. And you go to www.carugo.com, and then when you flipped, it would go to login.azure B2C something.
Right.
.onmicrosoft.com. And the user go, why are we logging in there? It looks like we're redirecting to some non-Carugo site.
Yeah.
And so we finally found a workaround, and then that workaround was adopted by Microsoft as the way to really do it. And so that was kind of nice because we didn't have to rewrite it. You can choose where you're going to store all your data. And so this whole service is capable of being deployed in like a GDPR regulated environment, in a HIPAA environment, so that you can know where that data is sitting at rest. And then once you get it set up, you'll notice there's, move forward. Uh-oh. No, that's right. Sorry. You'll notice there's some very similar menu items to Azure AD. See users and groups. Company branding is on Azure AD. You can do the company branding here as well, which is logo and whatnot. App registrations are what we know and love when it comes to dealing with REST APIs and websites.
So
behave exactly the same way.
if you're creating an app registration, do you do it here or do you do it in your Azure tenancy, or does that just,
Here.
okay?
This actually has an app registration that's in your main AD, your Azure AD. In order for all that, in order for the billing and all that stuff to work.
So is it really just, it depends on the audience. If you're writing a customer application, you do it here, but if you're writing like an internal employee application, you might do it on the,
So an internal employee application will be written on Azure AD.
Yeah.
Because you have that, because you're talking about your users and you cannot have employees in Azure B2C.
Yeah.
Right, you just can't use it. It's invalid licensing.
Mhm.
And so you would do the app registration there and do that. It gets a little bit different when you start talking about external partners and domains that aren't your Azure AD domain. At which point now you can set up Azure B2C to deal with all of those individuals coming into your apps. You can, and the app registrations are specific to that instance of Azure B2C. And so because of that, they're kind of with the app, right? The app can be deleted. That resource group can be torn down, and so does all of the identity that went with it. Whereas today, when you put that stuff in Azure AD, you wind up with these app registrations that are sitting out there that nobody knows what they're for. And they don't know what they're accessing, and they know they can't delete them. And so they just continue to pile up. And so Azure B2C provides a nice clean break. Also provides what developers need, which is the ability to have multiple environments of users so that they can develop new things and test new ways to log in without having to do that on a production Azure AD instance. Right, and so it's, in my opinion, if you're going to do a user database for your app, be it a mobile app or whatnot, and they're not employees, use something like this. You can also use, there are other ones too. You can use Auth0, you can use Okta. There's other ways to do this as well, but this is Microsoft's offering. And so as we continue, where was I? Member guests, MFA, all that's fully supported. In the beginning, they didn't have role-based authorization, kind of clunky at this point, right? And so we talk about authentication and authorization, authentication being the item that tells you who you are. Authorization tells you what you can do with that ID. And authorization was kind of left by the wayside with Azure B2C. It's full circle in Entra external IDs. Because extra internal ID is intended to be integrated with entitlement management. And so, but by the end, knowing that they hadn't done the full transition, they've now integrated role-based authentication or authorization into the app. And so you can set up not just scopes on your APIs so that you can restrict what they get access to, but you can go ahead and deal with RBAC rules to get people access to in the same way that you see in Azure AD or in any of your apps. There's certain privileges you have, like global reader, global writer, and they're just kind of listed with English words as to what you can do with them. You can build that same thing in Azure B2C.
is it the same experience as Azure AD, like for creating that? Like, so you go to the app registration and you create roles, and then you go to the like enterprise application and you assign roles to groups.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It's in the app registration side is literally just picked straight out of Azure AD.
Yeah.
Just which tenant is being applied to.
You have to create all new groups.
Right.
B2C
You in the
tenant.
B2C tenant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is because you don't want to bridge that gap and you can't.
I thought about doing a talk on that specific topic because app registrations, enterprise applications, and role assignments, that's complex stuff in Azure AD. They do not make it easy, even
They don't
though
make
it
it
really
easy.
should be.
And developers just, they struggle because they just haven't learned it, right? And it's been this new concept of. The other thing we can define here is API identity providers. So there's a slew of identity providers, like 15 of them, something like that. WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, you can keep going. Instagram, it's same as Facebook, I think.
And they have generic, just an
Apple.
OAuth, right? Where you can
Yeah.
just like plug in any OAuth provider.
And they have the local accounts. Local accounts is the one where you provide your ID and it stores it. It's the analogy to ASP.NET Identity that's storing that email address. And so you can offer to your users the ability to log in with whatever connector you want to provide. And you just got to configure the connector and it'll broker the tokens from that authentication provider. And then that authentication token comes in and picks up the rollback authorization, the role-based authorization, so that you can get access to resources in the app. You can also define custom attributes that can be collected during registration. You can, and then there's an entire like user identity experience that allows this to be customizable. And the app that I'll show you us logging into or registering on has, out of the box, it doesn't send, Azure B2C doesn't send an SMS code to verify your phone number, or it doesn't send an email to verify your email, but you can put that in place and prevent somebody from getting logged in without verifying their information. And so in order to do that, you use it's really flexible, but it's absolutely obtuse to use. And there's very little documentation on the web. And it's the primary thing that they fixed in Entra External ID is the ability to author workflows of logging in. I mean, you can do everything from reaching out to other REST APIs that you guys have developed internally with your applications. So you need to register it with some internal app that's governing access. You can just make the REST API call and do it. And you can change everything from giving you emails to, oh, I want to register by phone number, which seems to be some popular new way to identify with a website these days. It's just give me your phone number. I don't even need your email. And we'll do everything over SMS. It's XML based. There's quite a number of GitHub repos that are in various stages of aging, just like you would see with any, how do I do this on Stack Overflow or whatnot? You might get something from 6 years ago that you've got to update in your own head and apply it to the latest version. But you can do it, and it does work. I know it works because we implemented it. And then below that, you've got all of the existing things with conditional access and auditing and risky users. And you'll see if you look at this and then look at Entra ID is now paired with Purview and tied all into all the compliance and everything else that Microsoft has in the last year and a half kind of layered on top of their offering with Office 365. Pricing's pretty cheap. For a small website, doesn't cost you a dime. 50,000 active users a month. Doesn't cost you a dime. And then over 50,000, you start paying. It's not terrible. It's 0.3 of a cent for every active monthly user.
Oh, that's cheaper than Okta, right? I seem to remember, unless Okta has adjusted their numbers since the last time I looked.
I think they may have, but so Microsoft's got to compete with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but this is their published pricing. If you're with a vendor like us, we give a discount, you get it even cheaper than that.
Your second 50,000 is only $162.
Yeah,
A
per month.
That's not bad.
It's not terrible.
The first 50,000 being free. I mean, that's a pretty big business. Like,
Yeah.
really.
Well, they want, and I understand why they want to do that, because once you get, of all the things that you lock your website into, the identity platform is the hardest one to move. It's really difficult to move user accounts from one technology to another. You can move databases.
I had
Because you can't just give one
I had to migrate users off of, was it Drupal or onto like identity server, and there was just like
It's not fun.
tens of thousands.
And then they do a flat SMS charge. 3 cents. Doesn't matter where you send the SMS. Send it to the Philippines, send it to Japan, send it to anyone in the United States. It's 3 cents. But that's per MFA. What's he doing?
I'm watching his inception happen in real time. Like
What is
realized
going on?
Like it picked up his movement on the camera, so the camera like pointed at the TV.
And then he was like,
Oh, did you get
how
an
did this
infinity?
happen?
You got an
And
infinity
I
camera?
started to realize it too.
His other one.
Awesome.
But it was like transposed, so it was
I just couldn't figure out who that good looking guy was.
man, that right side of him.
You do have to buy premium P2 in order to get conditional access and lots of the auditing tools. That's not any different than Azure AD. You don't get half of Azure AD unless you got a P2 license somewhere in your licensing scheme.
But it's still free for the first 50,000. Is there
Yeah.
there's no cost beyond that, so
Yeah.
starting out with B2 is only costly if you go over that number.
Yeah, and it gets, almost 2 cents per active user a month, so that's quite a bit
Yeah.
more. Becomes almost $1,000 a month instead of 160 or 50 or whatever.
Do you have to so to buy, are you buying it for every active user and you just keep a pool or?
No, they bill you in arrears.
Okay.
Okay, so if
They look at what you used last month, so you get billed.
said-
is it literally like if the user logged in that month, they count,
It's
and if
monthly
they
active
don't?
And you just set it on the tenant that says like every user logging in gets P2.
Yes.
You aren't picking.
Yeah,
and choosing
the
stuff.
identity
Like in
exists, but if they
workforce,
log
it's
in.
like, we may be
Okay,
like,
so-
hey, these 10 people are P1s and the rest of these 50 are like P2s.
So you don't want to tie
Yeah,
the
you're
billing
buying
side
it
into
at
it. You want to
the
just
entire
have that
time.
open, so, because you don't
Also
want them to
another
log
reason
in
why you
every
may not
month to look at
want
their bill.
to have some of your other.
Oh, dang it,
your
they just logged in to look at their bill.
non-production IDs, right, because those will all fit under the 50,000.
Mhm.
And it would be, and you could see it from even like from a Humana standpoint or even MetLife, right? During any kind of open enrollment or any kind of that time of year, your bill will go through the roof and then your bill will come down to almost nothing for the rest of the year as people aren't logging into that anymore.
That's
Every time it happens.
Oh, so you watch them see it happen?
I'm like, what are you laughing at? What did I say wrong? I get this guy, I got Schmo behind me over here.
Anthony was leaning, and then the next one was leaning the other way, and then
And so there, we'll talk a little bit about external ID. So external ID is in preview. Enter external ID is now, it changed even where you set it up. Instead of setting up Azure, like you would set up Azure B2B, Azure B2C right in the Azure portal or script it, you now set up Enter external ID in Enter ID. And there's a place to just go start declaring you've got these tenants. And so don't even know how scriptable that is. Because remember what I said about Azure B2C, it sits at like the root level of Microsoft, of their whole backbone. And so this is now baked off of Enter ID and subordinate to Enter ID, which provides it a little bit more integration. One of the things they realized with Azure B2C was some of the questions that were asked even here right now, which is how can we utilize this to deal with our partners? How can we utilize this in a B2B scenario? And Microsoft has struggled with B2B. Of Azure AD or Enter ID of guest users were good. They weren't great. They could have some privileges. They didn't have a whole lot, and they didn't really work well with entitlement management. Of entitlement management being this big thing they're pushing as of last year. I want to say maybe it's a couple of years old, and it's just picking up some steam. I'm just running in now into external ID being required for some of the sharing aspects of Office 365. Enter ID to share SharePoint externally is now tripping over some of these things. Hey, you got to set this up, even though it's still in preview, which is crazy, but it's in preview. It's really the B2B stuff that caused them that, and the identity framework where you can customize the app that caused them to do Enter ID, external ID, or Enter external ID.
What's the main point of B2B?
B2B is so that you can integrate your partners into your infrastructure without having to give them member accounts.
So you use their accounts directly.
We're
Right.
using B2B, like, Humana Military One Tenant, B2B.
That's B2B, okay.
Yeah, business to business, like, we know who they are, and we understand them, we're with the customers, it's random end users, like, we don't know who these people are. Like, they bought stuff from us, but like, we don't really know. 'em like
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's a demarcation layer between you and your partners. You can think about it with a manufacturing company that has a warehouse company. Well, they want to give that warehouse some ability to see their apps internally. And so they create that B2C or external ID tenant. They then turn around and take their tenant and say, oh, this is your domain name. We verified that domain name. And so now, because you're verified, you can see the entitlement management catalog that we publish, and you can come and request access to the things that you need to get access to. And instead of a central room of security people, it's now at the manager that's working with that warehouse to be able to say, oh yeah, you can have access to this and approve it. And so that's how external IDs begins to dovetail into and expand beyond websites, which is why I said in the beginning, take websites off. Because Azure B2C ran down this path of replacing ASP.NET Identity. And then customers started asking, can we use B2C in all these other ways? And those ways really weren't website oriented identity. They were access to resource identity, but I don't want you in my tenant. Because that creates the same thing app registrations do. You got all these accounts that are in the tenant and you don't know whether or not you can get rid of them. And they were from your partners and vendors. And now you know you can do that out of Entra ID, because once you cut that domain, you cut that trust relationship and all that just goes away. And it's kind of nice in that regard. And then last but not least, they took an absolute beating over their XML language to design workflow on how to actually log in. And developers hated it. Absolutely hated it. Where do I give this presentation? Because it's got a bunch of links if anybody wants to kind of.
I can share it on the meetup if you send
Okay.
send a
Send it
link
off
to the
to you.
slides.
So, yeah, I'll send you off the slides. A lot of these are straight out of Microsoft Learn with step-by-step instructions on how to go ahead and set this all up. Let's see. That's a presentation, but I do want to show you a demo, kind of what we're looking at.
Just with Entra external, that was like one of the things that was the big difference is you can utilize the cross tenancy stuff between the two tenants, where with Azure B2C you could. Like you have to do straight up guest invites for all the work accounts that you want to introduce to the B2C if you want them to be like linked. So like for us, like we were like, hey, you need to use this guest account inside the B2C. So that way, if you get, you win the lottery and leave, we don't have to go out to this B2C tenant, find your account and terminate it. It's just going to be terminated at the root. And you can avoid that. But with Entra, it's like, oh yeah, we can just put them in a group. And if they're on the team that manages B2C, put them in the group inside of Entra, they'll get provisioned over there. We don't have to do anything inside of there. We can stay out of there, as much as possible and actually use our back to more ability, because it's the B2C tenant. Yeah, there's not that many people that are going to be in here, but it's really hard to manage. If like, hey, somebody lost their access, the main person lost their access. Because whoever creates the B2C tenant is also the root account in there as well.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever tried to take anyone out that did the creation.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, a lot of Entra external ID is all generated around entitlement management. And then also dragging in from that compliance and auditing, because you get all the benefits of Purview layered on top of that, that you have a subset of in Azure B2C, but now you have even more with Entra ID. If I can figure out how to kill this presentation.
Gonna need your keyboard over there.
Yeah, how the hell do you do that?
He's
Oh,
holding
look at
it with his hand has
No,
made me
that's-
just nervous. Like you holding that like that and it's just like not moving. It would have slid right on off. have had to try to catch it with my foot already.
I'm in tablet mode. Let's change that. Oh, we have it. Yeah, so this is that Carrudo website. And we can go and sign in, work, hopefully, yeah. And so this is, when you log into any Microsoft app and you see that main screen of with, you know, with the login and it's all branded Microsoft. Yours is probably all branded Humana at this point, and MetLife's probably the same way, right? That's all done by taking over the branding, and this is actually a web page that we publish that's got some hooks in the web page that Azure B2C injects all of its logic and its forms. And so we can go ahead, I think, maybe? No, maybe I don't have it. No. It's not gonna like that.
You can sign up to be a new user.
Ooh, yeah, show us your LastPass.
Not doing that. Let's not do that, because it didn't get me in.
This company, right? This has gotta be a lot of entitlements.
And so the sign up flow has changed. And all of this is coming out of Azure B2C. And you can't even, you can see it says at the top, it says login.carrugo.com. And if you look further, Microsoft.com is kind of buried in the URL. Originally, that was what the URL was that we had to rewrite.
So
Yeah.
the way that like, say, like Humana does it is the customizing the domain.
Mhm.
It's all branded like that. Like, so you don't see the actual Microsoft.
Oh, yeah, we've done it this way, but now you can actually brand the rest of it. And all the way up until, I don't know, I think one of those pieces, I think it's API. No, it's the B2C. You can get rid of the www cars quick buy on Microsoft.com.
Would just be login
Yeah.
domain.
You can get rid of that now. We don't, because it checks out with a certificate and that certificate's anchored to the company. And so anybody that looks at the certificate or whatnot isn't really caring about the rest of the URL,
Right.
Mhm.
right? It's just that domain name that they're trying to validate. And so I don't even know if I have an account. Anyway, you know what, let me go over and. Yeah, this damn thing. I wanted to show you his code is the same. Right? Sure you guys have seen some of this code. This is in your website. It's an MVC, this is an API. And so when you're setting all of this up, you literally would if you set this up to Azure AD, it looks like, which one is this? It looks like the top one. It's the top one.
Yeah,
And
that's
then the bottom
regular.
one is the B2C login. And so you can tell they're literally cut and paste code. The top one here sets up at direct to Azure Active Directory or Entra ID. And the bottom one here goes up against Azure B2C. The only real thing that changes is there's a policy name that defines and this domain name. There's a policy name and a domain name that you have to access in order to get the authentication to work. But you're validating issuers, your tokens, your claims, all of that stuff comes out of Graph API, and it all gets done pretty much exactly the same as Azure Active Directory. That's what makes it nice.
So then down
It's
below,
familiar.
you're setting the roles for Azure AD for admins, Azure B2C for customers.
Yep. Yeah, and so this API can be accessed by both internal and external users. And it all comes together in this one, it would come together, the tokens presented, and either one of those sources works. So this isn't all being brokered through on this site isn't all being broken through Azure B2C, but all of the customer information is being brokered through Azure B2C. Right, because this app, these APIs were used, when you think about a web app, oftentimes we forget about the admin site, right? We want the front site and we push that front site to the users, and then we forget that there's a whole stuff we got to do to manage actually running this app in production. And so with this one, we actually did create the admin website in tandem with the front end website. And the admin website would authenticate to the APIs using Azure AD. And then the front end website would connect to the APIs using Azure B2C. Then I can give you, let me see if I can give you a look at ugliness of that XML looks like. It's in here somewhere. Share. I think it's a shared web.
You can tell when Microsoft made a product, like what decade by whether it was XML or YAML or JSON.
And so here, we've got this thing called Trust Framework, and it provides a base. And then from there, you provide all your workflows like change password, log in, register, of whatever. And then like there's a profile edit. And so you can't really dive into this in this meeting, but each one of those sections implements like a screen. And then that next screen goes on and there's an orchestration of screen to screen to screen, and there's pointers of like this reference ID profile edit that would maybe come after another reference ID of something else. And so these things are in XML and they're chained together. And that's what makes it absolutely miserable, because there's no visualizer for this XML. So you can't log into an app that kind of pulls it all together and draws lines between everything. And so you got to kind of just try to visualize it in your head. And it's really freaking terrible in that regard. But it works. And it's absolutely customizable based on, showing you what we can do with it. Any questions? Yeah, so there's sign up or sign in. And then, it gets big. Lots and lots and lots of data. Right, so how do you deal with that, right? But you can wrap your head around it and you can test it out. There's a user journey recorder that you can set up that will write what happened from step to step to step in a log and dump that log to application insights, which is actually really nice. It's the only way to debug this stuff. Any questions?
Is that tool you just talked about, is that in B2C or is that in?
It's with B2C, but it's kind of there's a GitHub. Somebody created it in GitHub.
Okay.
And you install it, you run it. Right,
Okay.
and it's installed. So you'd install that. You wouldn't install that in a production tenant unless you had to. Right?
Yeah, Camden, your bosses will never let you use that. It's open source. It's a big no-no.
You never know, man.
Right. And so I don't think
This is what we consider CUI data,
Right.
right?
Bro. Yeah, I'm gonna log it to whatever you come up with.
that's it.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
What do we do? How did I come in? 45 minutes, right on the
Not
money.
at all.
So anybody hungry?
Thirsty too.
Thirsty.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'll
Drink
go ahead
all
and
this
stop
water,
sharing.
still thirsty.
I don't know. You can never have that thirst quenched, huh?